everyone. Thank you so much for joining Cults and Overcoming. So I know I haven't put anything out lately. I've had a few personal things going on, but I am back and we'll be putting a few episodes out within the next couple months. So I am pretty excited today. Kacey, my guest today, is a podcaster herself and has done quite a few interviews now, I would say, over the past couple of years. And she is here to tell some of her story and kind of why she started that. And I'm going to go to welcome Kacey. Hello.
Hi, Syria. Thank you so much for inviting me here to talk to you on your show about some interesting things. It's nice to switch it up sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. I know that you are kind of part of the reason I started this channel. I did your interview, like 2 years ago now? It was like a year and a half to 2 years.
Yeah, a while ago now. Yeah.
And so you had me and a couple other people on from Straightway, which we call it Restoration City on here. That's kind of the more recent name they have it under. But you had a few of us on. And so when I did my interview on there, it just really gave me the bug to like really go with it. And because I had been thinking about it for the past couple of years now and just always way too nervous or scared or what are people going to think. And I had never really talked about what I had been through openly. But then like when I finally was able to really share some of my story and everything, it really kind of put me into gear, So thank you for that.
Wow.
I appreciate it.
That's amazing. I had no idea that was the case, but I mean, your interviews that you're having on your show now with fellow survivors is really incredible stuff. And I can see when you're going through the process with those guests that you have on the show that it's quite cathartic for all of you. So that's amazing that you took that leap. And I know that the first time recording, especially when it's just you on your own, is the most bizarre thing, but it really gets easier after a while. So it's just great to be working in the space together.
For sure. It was so nerve-wracking. I mean, I don't know if you could tell or not, but I was so nervous at first. But now that I've done it quite a bit now and everything, I mean, not quite a bit, but somewhat, I've gotten a little more used to it. But yeah, that first time I was like, whoo, I was sweating, just like.
Yeah, I remember my first interview, my top was soaking wet and I had sweat dripping down my back. I was so nervous of, saying the wrong things or asking the wrong questions. And I actually, it was with Helen Zuman, who wrote the author who wrote the memoir Mating in Captivity. And it's about her time in a group called Zendik on Zendik Farm. And I read Helen's book and then I went and read up some newspaper articles about things that had come out around the time that Zendik was kind of exposed. And a lot of the headlines read things like sex cult. Mm-hmm. So in my interview with Helen, I was like, wow, part of a sex cult. And she was like, it wasn't a sex cult, and I really need to correct you there. It was a group that had a radical take on sex and relationships, but it wasn't a sex cult, and it's really important to make that distinction. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry if I've offended you. Now, when people correct me, I kind of welcome that correctness, because how else can I learn if people don't set me straight on things that I'm not sure on? So, but at the time, as my first interview, I was so worried that I'd really offended Helen, and also learned a lesson there about the types of things that media might print that aren't really correct. So learned a lot in that first interview. Yeah.
Wow, that's interesting. So you are a podcaster, and the name of the podcast is The Cult Vault, which is pretty interesting. I've been listening to a few episodes within the past week, and you have all different types of people on and stuff. So do you want to real quick kind of describe, well, I guess a little bit more into detail about what the Cult Vault is, and then also why you started it?
Yeah, absolutely. The Cult Vault is a long format interview based podcast where I speak to a different cult survivor each week. Sometimes I speak with counselors, experts, authors. Sometimes the people I speak to might identify as all of the above. Mm-hmm. But we really have branched out since the show started. It began as a deep dive, research-based podcast on infamous cults. So you think of Jim Jones, you think of Charles Manson, you think of Keith Raniere. And that was really what my podcast was going to be until Helen approached me and said, would you like to read my book? And I read it and I was like, wow, can I chat with you? And I never thought she'd say yes. And when she did, it really changed the entire trajectory of the podcast. And now I just released episode 200 yesterday. So we're 200 episodes in. Yeah, a huge milestone. And Helen's interview with me made me realize that there is so much about the subject of cults that I didn't realize. I think I was quite ignorant and lacked education in the field. Every interview that I've had since then has been an education for me and hopefully for the listeners as well. And so the podcast has really changed now in terms of the coverage, and it's misleading that the show is called The Cult Vault and has kind of the silhouette of Charles Manson's face as the logo. But I really didn't want to change the branding that I'd set up even after the subjects of the show changed. So we cover cults, high demand religious groups, high demand groups, coercion, control, and all manner of the overarching title of the psychology of coercive control, really. So there may be testimonies from survivors who have joined and left Scientology, for example, which, is a notable group classed as a cult in mainstream society. But also we cover things like family relationships and one-on-one cults with violent domestic partnerships and intimate relationships. We've discussed the armed forces with the US Marine Corps and the US Army in terms of the high demand methods involved in a group. And that's not to say that the podcast is anti-military in any way. It's also not to say that the military is a cult. I think there could be arguments made that parts of the military are cult-like, but the high demand structures in place within the armed forces can be taken by people wanting to replicate those models into environments that might be abusive and coercive outside of the armed forces. So it's still important to highlight where these structures come from, where these high demand groups get their influences from. So really the whole show now is a big amalgamation of all things coercion.
What made you, so is that what mainly made you start it? Did you have any background yourself within this, like growing up in it or anything, or like?
No, I'm not somebody that has a personal experience in a cult-like environment myself. The show was really born out of me being in lockdown with a newborn baby and a full-time working partner, and really feeling like the sudden change of identity that comes with becoming a first-time parent and not really being able to have the level of support that I might have had if we weren't in lockdown. It really led me into searching for something that was outside of motherhood. I was having all of these really amazing, incredible first-time experiences with our firstborn, breastfeeding and the developmental stages that you can recognize, and really kind of just nurturing this tiny little bundle. But also what comes with that is sleep deprivation. You really start to neglect your self needs in terms of, like getting a shower, brushing your hair. And I think I was just really looking for something that I could work on outside of motherhood, something that was for Kacey as a creative individual as opposed to Kacey as a mother. And I tried a few different things, and podcasting was really the only thing that stuck. Originally I was going to do a podcast on unsolved mysteries because I made research.
That's interesting.
I made research notes years before on unsolved mysteries that I found really interesting. But then my friend Lou approached me and was like, I've just finished this book written by Jenna Miscavige about her leaving Scientology, as her father, David Miscavige, is the now current leader of Scientology. And she gave me the book to read, and I was like, wow, yeah, cults is a really interesting subject, actually. And so kind of here we are. Everything just changes all the time. And the show is not anything like I thought it would be this far on. I don't even know if I even thought anybody would listen, or if, I'd make more than 10 episodes, or if I'd carry on after lockdown. We didn't even know there'd be like 5 lockdowns. So, so it really just kind of started off as a project for something for me to work on, and has just become my full-time job.
That's awesome. I mean, I know a lot of moms can relate to that, of wanting or needing something else to do, or, and so that's great. I mean, you are a good interviewer. As I've listened to some of these more and more, I'm like, yeah, and you have a good sounding voice as well. Cause there are some podcasts I listen to, and like the sound of someone's voice, but even like it could even be the guest they have on, they just sound so boring. And I'm like going to sleep, you know what I mean? But you have a good sounding voice too. So for anybody out there, listen to the Cult Vault. Just saying.
Thank you, Syria. I think it might be something to do with the British accent, because
I think so.
And I think my partner would probably disagree with you about me having a nice sounding voice. After all these years together, he's probably not thinking that.
That's so funny. He's like, just the sound. Well, one question I did have that I was just kind of wondering, now that you have 200 and stuff, and is there like a consistent thread you've noticed from, I guess, more of the people that have come out of cults and the different types of cults or religious backgrounds? Is there, I know my answer, but I'll let you start with yours. Is there like a consistent thread going throughout these that, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it definitely does. It's something that I have recognized for the last sort of 140 so episodes. There are commonalities and notable hallmarks of cult-like groups from one interview to the next. And although the systems in place may be recognizable from one movement to another, the experience of the individual that I'm interviewing is completely unique from one person to the next. And that is something that's really kind of difficult to reckon with at first. Understanding that somebody in a spiritual group may have been told to keep a journal, and somebody in a religious group may have been told to keep a journal. And even though those practices are perhaps for the same agenda of leadership in terms of monitoring followers to use the information later on for public shaming or whatever the reason is for keeping journals, the experience that the person has in terms of journaling will be completely different from one person to the next. People might say, journaling is something that I have continued to do every day of my life. And somebody else might say, I can't journal, I can't look at journals, I can't even begin to think about writing my own thoughts and feelings down, or doing those practices with a therapist, because of the reoccurring triggers and psychological difficulties that come with somebody reliving those coercive practices that they were subjected to.
That's interesting. Wow. I kept during the time I was at the cult that I grew up in, I kept a journal. And it's weird now, like I don't really write anymore. It's not that I'm not thinking like I don't want to do that or something. It's not, it just, I think I wrote so much back then, and I look back now, it's really strange. I look back now at these notes and stuff, and I'm like, what? It's like on some level, I was still trying to be so spiritual, even in my writing. It's really weird dynamic, but at the same time, I was in such a deep depression and like so sad and just crying all the time. Like I hated being there. But at the same time, it was still trying to write in a spiritual way. It makes no kind of sense, but it's like just the level of control that they have and stuff. But I'm sure a lot of people wrote like, just like you said, that's interesting.
I think that conflict, that inner conflict, is quite recognizable as well across different groups. That might be another hallmark of cults and coercion. I think that inner conflict is something that is quite common and recognizable across various groups. I know that Faith Jones talked in her memoir Sex Cult Nun about her time growing up in the Children of God, that she experienced that inner conflict of wanting to keep her body to herself, but also understanding that the way to be recognized or praised within the group was to be over-sexualized as a child and to take part in the sexual practices that were expected of all members of the Children of God. So that, I guess, is cognitive dissonance. Your brain can't fathom reality, so you live in this kind of self-created reality, or the reality that the group has set for you. And your brain is trying to, consolidate the fact that it's not reality, but that's too painful or difficult to unravel. So you just remain in this, predetermined or pre-established reality that is actually not truthful to actual everyday life.
Yeah, for sure. Some of the stuff that I've noticed, just like watching different documentaries and listening to some of your episodes and stuff, and there's always like a consistent thread that I've seen, and that's like dealing with whether it's money, power, sex, and mostly control, just having a control over a group of people, and usually answering to one person. Like with the vow, there was a couple people at top, but there was one main leader in it stuff. And usually the main leader is very narcissistic. And I know where we were, the guy his daughter is more in charge now, but when we were there, he was in charge. I mean, just the definition of a narcissist, like, everything is gone. It goes through him. You can't ask questions. If you do ask questions, you're brought into counseling. It's just a one-way you're going this way or the highway. They would always say that too. I hate that phrase now.
I think you're right. I think that the various documentaries that have been created around NXIVM and Keith Raniere as a leader, or Vanguard as he wanted to be called, which means, leader. I think you can see narcissistic traits within all of the different coverage that has come out since The Vow, Seduced. I know that there's an episode of NXIVM on cults and extreme belief that Janja Lalich was a part of, and she's one of my personal heroes. She would probably argue that you shouldn't really idolize anybody because of the subject matter that we're talking about today, but work to the field of cult education is absolutely invaluable even to this day, after 30-40 years being a leading expert in the field. So I think you can see with Keith Raniere, I think you can, we spoke about the deep end with Teal Swan, I think you can see a pattern of self-centeredness, arrogant thinking and behavior, lack of empathy and consideration to other people, excessive need for admiration, cockiness, manipulative, selfish, patronizing, demanding. I think you can see all of those traits quite easily amongst any notable cult leaders that you discuss, whether that is Charles Manson or whether that is an abusive partner in an intimate relationship. I think you can recognize those traits quite easily. And if you have the words to put to the individual, definitions in terms of, narcissistic personality disorder, I think that can give an individual back a lot of power, because there's a lot of power in language, whether that is power that's being abused by people who are using language to manipulate other people. In a straight way, using biblical text to do that, spiritually abusing people. Sorry, Restoration City, or whichever name it's going by these days. I know it's like rebranded a million times.
It has. I think they're even under a different name now. So
wow.
Besides that, so it's, I mean, most people will know when you say straightway what that is. So
I think you can see that language being abused within groups like Straightway, who will interpret the text to benefit the leadership, to further manipulate followers. But it can also be used as a tool for recovery, identifying the methods that have been used against you, like narcissistic personality disorder or gaslighting, for example, or love bombing. You know, having these words and these definitions to apply to the systematic abuse that's been put onto a person can really help in recovery. And I know that Amanda Montell talks a lot about the effect that language can have on both sides in her book Cultish. And I think it is really important to just identify that. So yeah, narcissistic personality disorder, I think you can see all of those narcissistic traits on whichever cult leader you want to pick out of a hat. I think you could just say, what cult leader am I talking about, and list off all of those traits, and people would, throw 50 different names back at you, because they can. And similarly to what you've said about, recognizing similarities between various cults and groups, I think you could say, which group am I talking about, and throw out some identifying attributes of that group, and still you might have so many, say 20 to 30 different groups that it could apply to.
For sure. So when you interviewed myself, Stefan, and Troy, I'm just getting your outside perspective, because you're outside looking in. What is your, in hearing all of our stories, would you consider what we went through to be a cult?
Yes, I would say yes.
Why?
I would be inclined to say that for a number of different reasons. I think that there is a huge level of dependency that is nurtured within Straightway, in terms of families that move there with the intention of being part of a community, but then any money generated is going to fund their stay basically at Straightway, but then leaves the individuals who seem to most of the time arrive with not much in the first place, creates that level of dependency on the group for things like food and shelter. If you don't have family and friends that you can go to when you want to leave a place like Straightway, you really don't have much choice, unless you want to subject your family, young families a lot of the time, to homelessness, or to attempting to get help from the system, which doesn't really work for everybody. Sometimes people can be homeless for weeks waiting for accommodation, going through, I mean, especially in the UK. I can't speak specifically for America, but I know that over here it's really difficult for individuals to be recognized by the council and understand that, there's emergency housing that's needed. I think that the fact that the leader had a mansion built for himself and his family from people that were part of Straightway, I would class that as labor trafficking. And I would say that that is another thing that contributes to the group being cult-like. What Stefan told me about the intercom system that existed from the different mobile homes or wherever individuals were staying, that type of kind of surveillance and monitoring was really shocking when I heard that. And clearly it stuck with me, because it's something that I can just pull out of a hat when we're having this discussion. So there's a few things that I think you could look at and say, that's not in the best interests of the community. That is in the best interests of leadership. And when you can look at something and say that that is in place purely to benefit the leadership, then it's not healthy, it's coercive, and therefore can be identified as cult-like.
Interesting. No, that's great to have to have a different perspective from the outside coming in. And yeah, it just all was about this one person being in control and power. And just like you said, using scripture, using the Bible according to his narrative of, you know what, this is what God showed me. I mean, what if I read the same scripture and it's like, you know what, well, I feel like God is telling me this means this to me. It's like kind of like when you read a poem or something, it can mean two different things to us. But that, to me, it's like that shouldn't mean like, well, you're out of it. You don't know what you're talking about.
And that's exactly why we have hundreds of thousands of fringe sects of Christianity that exist. People that have looked at the same text and said, actually, I disagree with you on that point. It could be something major, it could be something really small. And so they break away from their group and start their own group and so on and so forth. And that's really not even looking at groups that came out of the second and third Great Awakening. We're not just talking about significant branches of Christianity like the Mormon faith, which is broken down to kind of the main two branches of being the LDS and the FLDS church. We're not even talking about things just like the Jehovah's Witnesses and other major groups that now exist under Christianity. Groups have broken away and broken away and broken away. The Kingston clan is different to Warren Jeff's branch of the FLDS, even though the Kingston clan does still identify under the FLDS banner. So even that is just one small example of how all of these groups have done exactly what you just said, Syria, and just said, actually, no, this is how I interpret the text.
So did you watch, I was going to ask you earlier, did you watch this show? Okay, it's not a documentary. It's a Hulu show, under the banner of heaven or something, or
yeah, no, I had with Andrew Garfield.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, no, I haven't watched Under the Banner of Heaven. My Norwegian friend told me to watch it, and I've had several people tell me that I need to read the book. I know it's an adaptation of the book. So it's a dramatized adaptation. I've heard it's really good.
It's so freaking good. When I first saw the trailer, I was like, this looks kind of weird. And some Hulu shows are always up, like, they're okay, they're not. This was really freaking good. Because it just just from the first episode and everything. But it's obviously it's fiction, but I feel like it's loosely based a little under some of that sept of what you just said, is based, Under the Banner of Heaven is based on a true story that is documented in the 2003 book of the same name, Under the Banner of Heaven. So it is based on a true story. But it's just crazy, like what religion, when you try to follow something to what you think God is saying to the T, and how crazy it can get. It's like,
well, yeah, I mean, especially if you're going, I mean, what part of the Bible? Because if you're looking at the Old Testament, that's where some of the really abusive practices come in terms of whipping and stoning and really horrific things that happened in the First Testament, or the Old Testament, sorry. So it really depends on which book of the Bible you're looking at, which version of the Bible, because the King James Bible was basically like a rewritten version that served the interest of King James at the time. So yeah, it's really impossible without the true translations. I mean, even then you're translating it, so it's not accurate, but looking at the original manuscripts, and I don't know how much of that ever survived, how much had to be filled in by interpreters. It's really, it's a touchy one. It's a touchy one. And everybody thinks that they have the right answer. You know, that's another commonality amongst all of these high demand religious groups that work underneath Christianity. And I'm sure underneath all other major religious umbrellas as well, whether that's Islam, whether that's Buddhism, Hinduism. And that is that we have the truth. Every other group outside of this has been influenced by the devil, has been influenced by some negative force, or has been led astray. And unless people come to terms with us being the correct way and then adhere to our scripture, to our principles and practices, they will never be saved in the way that we are saved. Us as members of the XYZ church are the only ones who will go to the kingdom of heaven, or whatever caveat it is that that particular group is offering for followers' salvation.
Yeah, that's very true. Now that I've thought so much about this and about like the Bible itself and the intake and outtake, and like, I mean, I grew up having to memorize scripture. You had to memorize, you had to read it every morning, you had to do this, this, and this, you had to, and now I myself, like everybody knows this, that has listened to my channel, I do believe in God. I believe that there's a higher power. But when it comes to the Bible, I think there are good stories in it, good parables, good things to abide by. But I don't think that every little thing is, you have to take it so literal, because just like you said, it's been translated so many times now, that back then, 1,000 years ago, that could have meant something different in that age back then to what it means now. And it just, you got to kind of take things with a grain of salt as well. And
I think that's great. I think that that's really important to note, that despite the circumstances that you, Troy, Stefan, Scott as well, just like to say a little shout out to Scott, because he's been a good champion of probably both of ours, I imagine, over the last couple of years, is that you can sit down and recognize within yourself that faith is something that you still have, but perhaps under your own terms, as opposed to dictated to you by somebody who wears the white cloth or who preaches from the pulpit. You can say, I have faith, and I can look at the Bible. And I think if I was to find faith, I would hope that I would find it in the same way you've explained. You can look at the Bible in the same way someone might look at the book of Dianetics in Scientology and say, these are basic life principles, and if we live by these principles, we should have pretty happy, healthy lives, and also be good role models and champions for people around us, and supportive, decent people, if we use these kind of, this framework. I think then where it's difficult for me is that you can't look at things like Noah's Ark. You can't look at things like, the splitting of the sea, and understand that factually and scientifically, those things aren't possible. And also that, the earth is older than 6,000 years old. And I think that when you look at that science and then you look at the Bible, it's difficult for me to see, and I know that people that have been born and raised in these groups have been taught and told this their entire lives, but it's difficult for me to understand how you can blindly follow to the letter and really believe that all of these things happened when science is science is fact. It's not something that's been written by man. It's not something that's been changed by man. It's not something that is indisputable. Science is science, and you can't change the outcome of those things. So I guess that's more, and I don't really tend to talk about my personal belief systems on the show, but I guess that's kind of where I place myself.
It's just kind of not knowing, or just kind of like,
I don't know. I don't know if I don't think that there's like a big bearded man in the clouds that looks a little bit like Zeus, who created the world in 7 days. And I don't think that there is somebody that's watching over every single one of us, determining, you know, whether we should get help or not get help. I think I believe in people a lot more than I could ever believe in something that I've never seen, something that I've never experienced. I think that if people have faith and spirituality, if it's not being abused in any way, I think it probably is a really special thing to have. It's not something that I've personally experienced. It's not something that I understand, but I don't claim to either. I would also never tell anybody that their belief system is rubbish, or that it's ridiculous for them to hold things in their belief system just because it's not something I understand. You know, I've said I don't understand how somebody could understand those things or believe in those things, but that doesn't mean that I think people shouldn't. You know, but I would also expect people to have the same respect for me as somebody that is an atheist. I think, yeah. I mean, there's loads of different terms, but I think I most identify as an atheist. Yeah.
You kind of sound like that other one though. What is one that's in between atheist and not
agnostic? Yeah,
agnostic. Yes.
I do kind of. My partner challenges me on that sometimes. Yeah, I don't think, I don't know, and it's strange to talk to somebody that that does have these beliefs. I don't think that there's anything after death. I don't believe in, I know maybe, oh no, I don't believe in reincarnation. If I'm really to sit down and think about it, I don't believe in reincarnation. I don't believe in life after death. I don't believe in ghosts and all of that stuff. So when I really sit down and think about it, I think, yes, I am an atheist, but I'm also kind of like, it would be nice. It would be nice if those things happened, you know? My grandmother, she was the most special person in the world to me. And people say, oh, she's, you know, she's proud of you and she's looking down on you. And that is such a beautiful sentiment. It makes me irrationally angry though, because I don't think that's true. And I don't think it's fair for people to say those things to me when it's when I think it's unlikely that that's the case, you know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't know. Strange. I've never really discussed it publicly before, I guess, because the platform is for other people to tell their stories. So
no, I mean, it's very, you know, an interesting take. And like everything that I grew up in and everything was so diehard Christian that anytime you heard somebody was agnostic or didn't believe in God at all, it was just like, well, they are a horrible person going to hell, going straight to hell. And now my belief is so not that. It's so, people come from different backgrounds and things that they go through in their life, and to get them to a point that they are at this point, like I have no idea what your background is, but you know, there's a reason people believe the way that they do as they get older. And so for me to sit and judge and be like, oh, you know, you don't do this, well, you're going to hell. Like, I'm not a judger. I'm not, even if there, you know, I do believe in God. I believe that there is this, we die, we're going to go to, like, there is a heaven and stuff, but also I'm not a judge and juror, you know, like that's just not my place. And so I think that you can have honest conversations where it's like this, like going back and forth, and like, you know, we could have different political views as well, but I don't look at you or the people any differently. It's just, you know, your view on life and your view on things. And I think nowadays people get so bent out of shape and so offended, and you're like, dude, like seriously, can we just all get along? Like,
yeah, I think that what you've said there is important to highlight, really. And you would hope that, you know, being able to sit down and have discussions about different belief systems and different political views openly in a non-judgmental way, in a compassionate and understanding way, and not particularly empathetic, but sympathetic at least, then it's progressive. Because my dad told me when I was growing up, you know, God is stupid, Jesus is stupid, how could anybody ever believe that? And I think that was, you know, as you've said, you're taught as you grow up, all of these things. And then as you get older, you kind of start to identify with your own views and beliefs, and you realize that what your primary caregivers force onto you is not necessarily what you have to hold true as an individual as you grow up and experience the world. And so I think now, if my father was to say something like that in front of me, I'd probably cringe. I'd probably be like, come on, that's not how people talk. That's not how open and understanding people would communicate with each other. So you would hope that even though our parents might not be able to sit in the same room and have these conversations, that
I don't think so. Yeah.
we're progressing.
Also, like, I think just everything that I've experienced and everything the place that I've come to now, I'm just like, I'd really hope if I'm going to sit here and I expect you to listen to me talk about God, well, I better have respect for you as well. Like, it's a give and take. It's a, back and forth. A little bit, we'll go from there to a little bit about a couple of the documentaries we've watched. And you said you had just got done watching the Deep End, right?
Yeah, it was a documentary that I had on my list for a while, but it was only after you mentioned wanting to chat specifically about the Deep End that I finally went to go and watch it. And I have a few thoughts about the documentary. I mean, what did you think of it?
I thought it was really interesting that this woman, okay, let me just read this real quick. The author is Teal Swan. And she started this YouTube channel a while back. I think it's been years now, I believe, talking about suicide mostly, I believe, but about some other stuff as well. And in the documentary, it kind of goes a little more into depth of how she was abused, how she was sexually abused as a little child. But now she's trying to become like this guru kind of person. And what's really interesting to me is I don't think she really had any kind of license or trained in this way to be dealing with people that are on this level. And that's what kind of scares me. You have different people that are some people are such followers of this. And then there are other people that apparently have committed suicide from following this as well. So it's about the Deep End is an American 4-part documentary series about the life and work of a controversial spiritual influencer and author Teal Swan. The docuseries was developed for Freeform by director John. Okay, yeah. So anyways, it's only a 4-part series on Hulu, and basically just follows this Teal Swan around and stuff.
Okay. Yeah, I think that the Conspirituality podcast did speak to a few of the people involved in the project as well. And their podcast focuses on the dangers of the New Age spiritual movement that is kind of gripping the world right now.
Interesting. Yeah, so basically this lady, she tries to become she's becoming this, or already is, this spiritual leader and everything. And one of her main, I won't give it, I probably I'm trying to think of how much I should say and not say, because if you're going to watch it, I don't want, or people are going to watch it out there, I don't want to just give it away. But she has main people that are dedicated to her that kind of end up leaving. But it's just an interesting take to see this person really go into suicidal tendencies when she has no license to do so. I don't know, just crazy, right?
Yeah. I agree with you there. I think the significant influence that she has over thousands of individuals is problematic when you take into consideration that there is frog poison that is used as part of one of the practices on the retreats that she offers, that she administers herself as somebody that's an unlicensed practitioner.
Is that is that the stuff you take? Is that like what is it? It's a type of drug, right?
It's called like Camboa, something like that. Okay, yeah, it's the frog poison. It's
maybe?
it's for detoxing purposes. So you
Okay,
go
wow.
on retreats, and people, that it's actually quite a big movement in itself. The frog poison, the part of the documentary where she was burning the individual's leg, Teal Swan herself, and then placing and then the woman was throwing up over the bucket.
Oh,
So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
that was her detox. But that's just one small part of something that would worry me, going to spend time with somebody that's not a licensed practitioner. But she is also talking about how to recover from deep-rooted trauma.
Mhm.
And as somebody that's not a licensed practitioner, who openly says that they are coming up against mainstream psychology,
Mhm.
and trying to, not necessarily debunk that, but to ignore it in favor of, Teal Swan's recommended therapy, is
Mhm.
quite a dangerous thing. There's reasons that oversight and licensing and judicial committees and all of those things, and years of money and education that people have to go through to become licensed therapists. There's a reason why all of those things exist, boards of
Mhm.
ethics and everything. And we talked about, before we hit the record button, that a fellow content creator called Andy Fellows, who has his own YouTube channel called Andy the Fellows, amazing
Mhm.
channel. You should definitely go and check it out. He talks all about New Age spiritualism and the dangers of spirituality in the New Age in regards to the internet, because he found Teal Swan's videos when he was in a particularly vulnerable place. And
Mhm.
that started off with him watching videos on conspiracy theories and ancient Egypt on YouTube. And then the aggressive algorithm kind of funneled him towards Teal Swan, who gets so much interaction with her YouTube channel that it benefits the algorithm and YouTube overall for them to promote content creators that have massive followings because of the ad revenue and all of those things that come with marketing your platform. And you see in the documentary that she gets her gold award sent to her from YouTube as well.
Mhm.
And there's a pyramid in play in the Deep End that I think is really interesting in regards to the other documentaries that you asked me if I'd seen,
Mhm.
because you've got people like Andy at the start, just kind of watching a bit of Teal Swan's content on YouTube, then people that subscribe and pledge money towards her, then people who become members of the Teal tribe, who go to watch her live shows, who pay hundreds of dollars for tickets to um to be on stage with her. And
Mhm.
then you have people that pay $5,000 for, or plus, for one-to-one sessions with her, and then even more money to go to these retreats that really kind of are almost the same as Nine Perfect Strangers. I don't know if you watched that show, but
Oh my gosh. Yes.
it was like the same thing. I
It's
felt like,
so I believe that show is loosely based
well, that
on the
makes a
Till
lot of
Swan
sense,
stuff.
doesn't it? That makes
Because
so much sense.
remember the part in the show where they're having that big where they're burying themselves, they're having to go, not bury themselves, but they're having to lay in the, yeah. And then the same thing happens in the dock
Yeah,
too.
yeah. Just
Um,
even the environment, the woodland areas, um and then of course in the upper echelon, so to speak, of the group, you've got Teal's closest followers, who, as we find out in the documentary, are expected to live by a set of rules that are non-negotiable. And that includes things like limited contact with people on the outside, family and friends, and a lot of talk around how everything that you do has to be in favor or to benefit Teal Swan. So
mhm.
there you kind of, the documentary really made a good point of highlighting those narcissistic traits of the need for constant admiration that Teal Swan appeared to have in the documentary. Obviously, we weren't there. Documentary makers are professional storytellers, and they can tell our stories in the way they want the story to be told. So we can't say for sure if that's exactly what was happening. Although from first-hand testimonies that exist online from people like Andy, who ended up, becoming more and more and more involved in the Teal Swan movement before exiting and then speaking out, that it's likely that is the environment that people are living in. And you mentioned again before we hit record a really uncomfortable part in the documentary. You didn't tell me what it was, but I'm guessing it's the part where they're all sitting around the circle and there is somebody that's being publicly shamed basically in front of everyone, because that was really uncomfortable to watch and orchestrated entirely by Teal Swan with reasoning that we weren't privy to. She was trying to accuse somebody of doing a certain number of things that we hadn't seen her do. So it was just, it almost felt like she couldn't stand her second in command being involved romantically with anybody other than herself. Again, that might just be how the documentary presented it, but yeah, it was very uncomfortable to watch that scene.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was, because I mean, that full scene, whenever you watch it, it's exactly what we did in Straightway. Like there's a circle of, well, what would you say, maybe 6 to 8 people, and Teal Swan is one of the main people in there, along with her main guy leader, and they're confronting the main guy's leader's wife, or I don't know if they were married at the time, but soon to be divorced. And it is so uncomfortable watching. And I started crying during it because it made me feel the way I felt back then, like whenever we were confronted. And like it was something called like the hot seat. You were in the hot seat. You were getting confronted. All right, everybody go around. We're gonna go around the corner here and say what's wrong with you, why we think you're out of it. And that's basically what happened in this scenario. You have Teal Swan confronting this person. I believe it's exactly what you said it was. I think she was jealous of her because even though they were not romantic together at that time, she still wanted his full attention and she wasn't getting it, And even if they tried, I feel like even if they tried to make her look in a good way, even, it would still come off as she was jealous of that. And so, yeah, it was just this whole scenario, and people, the way she was even talking, like other people would say stuff too. Yeah, we kind of agree. But it was almost like she was coercing the other people to agree with what she was saying. And if you didn't agree with that scenario, well, you were going to be in the hot seat as well.
Absolutely. And, I imagine that is something that you've experienced firsthand, or at least seen firsthand, where if you were to disagree or speak out against the person that was leading the session, then you would be subjected to the same treatment. It only bolsters the fear of followers and individuals and increases devotion to leadership, because who wants to be subjected to that environment? They've all signed these contracts. They've all lived with Teal Swan for a number of years. They all want to be as close to her as possible, but at the same time, if they do anything to upset her, they are going to be subjected to the same treatment. And no human being should ever have to endure what you've experienced, what they experienced in that documentary. And I don't think Teal expected the outcome that she got. And I think that's unfortunate for her, because I think he made the right decision. But we'll let the viewers go and have a little watch of that and make up their own mind. But I don't think it was Freeform's intention when they made the documentary to have cult survivors watch it and say, wow, I really resonate with that. I can recognize parts of that from my own experience. I think the way that they put it was more for shock value, for people who are like, wow, who would join a cult? Why would you stay there?
Mm-hmm.
I know that they said it was following the life of Teal Swan as a person and not looking at the entire community that she's built, but there was really a lack of coverage on the people that were following Teal Swan. There were a few individuals highlighted who came off as less than normal.
Mm-hmm.
People who were there because they were sexually attracted to Teal and wanted to have sexual encounters with her. I don't think that they really made an effort to focus on the types of individuals who might go looking for some type of extreme answer to deep-rooted trauma, which is what Teal Swan promises to give. There are so many people that have been involved in the Teal tribe that are genuinely suffering with really difficult things. And serving somebody's narcissism is not going to heal those things that individuals are struggling with. And I think what that documentary did was only enhance the stereotypes and stigmas that already exist around the type of person that joins a cult or the type of person that stays. I think that documentary really only encouraged people to other cult survivors even more, and they had a great opportunity to really bridge that gap, and they missed out on that when they didn't decide to do that. And that was really my biggest takeaway from the documentary. Interesting to get some insight into Teal Swan as an individual, but really could have focused a lot more on the community.
Yeah, I think that they were, from hearing the episode on a little bit faulty, I think the initial thing of it was just to be following Teal Swan and this movement that was happening. I don't think at first it was really trying to find that there was a cult within this. I think it was more just like following her, and then it ended up being kind of this other thing. That's kind of the way they explain it in this episode.
I mean, that makes a lot of sense. That does make a lot of sense. I think maybe being some people that are trying to kind of bring awareness to the subject of cults and coercion, it could have been really beneficial if they could have just added a 5th episode in that really highlighted that the impact that it has on individuals.
For sure. We'll just real quick go into another. I just want to talk about one other doc that I watched, because holy baby Jesus, this was insane. I still am just like, I cannot believe it, just the sickness of it. Keep Sweet, Pray and Obey. This one is on Netflix, and it's a little bit longer part episode, but Pray and Obey is an American doc on Netflix surrounding the polygamous fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ and Latter-day Saints, an offshoot of mainstream Mormonism. You know, one of the things that on some level, I could kind of relate to some of these people that were in it, because not to relate as to, I don't think what they were doing, because what they were doing, what the men were doing was awful. That when you are raised in an environment and that's all you know, then that's all you know. And you think it's either normal, or you think that this is the will of God. And even if the outsiders, the people on the outside, you think you are just so doing the will of God, and we're going to be going to heaven, and we're taking these people to heaven with us. And it's just that mindset that it's really sad that, like, until you get out of that environment, you realize how messed up it really was. Yeah, that's one thing that I really noticed in it. It was crazy though, right? Like I mean, for anybody that hasn't seen it, it's just, whew, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild documentary, and I think it has done a lot in terms of bringing awareness to forced polygamy and child brides, especially in Utah. Before we hit the record button, we talked about how theocratic states aren't aren't really legal under the under the amendment, and yet Utah really could be classed as a Mormon state. We see in the documentary that the police officers are fundamentalists, and everybody seems to be involved. I think you're right what you said about the documentary being extremely sad. I think that it does a great job of highlighting why people were attracted to the group in the first place, which is always an important question to answer. What drew you to the movement? And one of the guys was talking about, how multiple wives sounded like a great thing to him at the time.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with cults and coercion don't consider the fact that people can be born into these groups, into these insular environments, into these closed off communities where they have predetermined personalities and belief systems and no opportunity to experience the outside world, and recognize that their way of life is perhaps not legal, not typical, not healthy, not beneficial to them as individuals. And I think that it really helps people without much experience of cults and coercion to understand that it's not as easy as just leaving. People who don't have legal documents or passports or money or education or even knowledge of where the nearest bus stop is, where the nearest train station is, how to board a bus, how to buy a bus ticket, how to go to a train station, how to get through the turnstiles. Like some people will have had such closed off childhoods that they really have no idea of what typical clothing looks like. That people have opposing belief systems, that some people don't believe what's written in the Bible. I'm sure that they are told that there are people that believe different versions of the Bible and those people are wrong, but to be told that there are people that don't believe in the Bible at all, I'm sure is something that people in these communities don't even get to hear. And there are second generation adults that appear in the documentary who go on to have children, which means that there's third generation. So now we're multi-generational adults. The more that people exist in those environments, the longer that they exist and the more children that are born, there's less generational input around the influences of the outside world. So then you start to get to the point where even the parents don't know how people dress on the outside world, how people speak to each other on the outside world, what environments are happy and healthy. So what chance has a third, fourth generation member got when you think about that? And that is something that the documentary did really well. It did a great job of highlighting the faith as a whole and the belief system, and how child brides are the currency of the realm. And I think what the documentary could have done a lot better was to focus on the lost boys as a subject, because there are boys that are born through forced polygamy, where women don't get a say on how and when they have sexual intercourse. They can't take any type of birth control. They can't decide when to stop having babies, because how can leadership retain their power if they don't have any children, female children, to marry off to other high-ranking members of the group or high-ranking members of society that perhaps don't live in the communes but still identify as members of the FLDS church. So women are coerced into having more and more and more babies, and when the boys are born, they serve no purpose. They actually are a hindrance in the eyes of the FLDS church, because they are going to take up resources. They can't be sold. They can't be married off to high-ranking men And so they're sent away to different parts of the country or different parts of the world to build properties, to learn a trade, to exist somewhere other than the communes where the girls are being married off. And all of that money just goes back to serve the leadership. So there's another case of human trafficking and modern slavery in terms of labor trafficking of the lost boys, which is not really something that the documentary spent too much time highlighting. Maybe there's like a whole series that needs to be made around that subject as a whole so that people can recognize that that's something that exists. It's one of the most heartbreaking parts of forced polygamy as a lifestyle, as a belief system, as a structure that exists. And that's without even talking about the horrific abuses that the young girls are subjected to from, as early as 8, 10, 12 years old.
Yeah, so sad. Isn't it crazy that a lot of those lost boys were sent to build that place called Zion, I think it was called, or they called it something like Zion. And it was this big, huge church / I don't know, like a state thing. And basically that was, to me, that was for sex trafficking. Like, you're using these, it's just little girls and teenagers there who they end up marrying off when they're not legally authorized to be married. What, like at 14, 15, being forced to be married? And yeah, you're just pretty much using them as funds, as many as like.
Yeah, I think Warren Jeffs was one of these leaders who, well, I mean, he is still kind of leading the group, whether they say he is or isn't, but he's one of these types of leaders who really started to push his followers to see, how far he could push them. Maybe it was just a power thing at first and then served to really allow him to fulfill his own sexual desires through the abuse and exploitation of young girls, children, the rape of children. And I think what else was, missing from that documentary was also how those victims went on to recover. The last kind of 5 minutes of the documentary really was sort of the women saying, oh, I left it at this time and now I do this, or now I do this. And I think it would have been really important or beneficial to just kind of have a little bit of longer airtime around how those women were able to recover and what advice they might give to other people who have been through similar situations, not necessarily in terms of being child brides or being forced into a polygamous marriage, but just around like coercion and domestic violence and difficult intimate partnerships. But I do think that what that documentary has done has really highlighted to people that might not be familiar with the subject that this is happening right now. And people were so shocked by it, thinking that it was something that happened in like the 80s and 90s. And people are like, oh my goodness, he's just been arrested. And so I think that has opened up the subject of cults to perhaps a demographic that would not have looked at it in that way if it wasn't for this documentary.
For sure. I had no idea that stuff was still going on. I was kind of like that. I thought that was kind of back then, like in the 70s or 80s. And it's still going on. I mean, he's still pretty much leading out of still being in prison, which is so disturbing. I mean,
it was just wild. You could just see his escalation of paranoia, which we see amongst, other cult leaders. You can see it with Jim Jones, where he was increasing the white knight rituals where they would practice suicide just to see if his followers would do it. He would put out fake laced punch to see if they would do it. And so Warren Jeffs was doing the same with his He got his most devout followers in a circle and said, you, and you. I think one of them was his brother as well. You're not devout enough to me, so I'm going to kick you out. You're not allowed to come back. You need to divorce your wives. Your wives are going to stay here. They're going to be married off to other people. I will decide who they get married off to, and they'll continue having children who will fund my empire. And it's really, you can just see his escalation in paranoia, and he becomes so delusional that once he moves all his followers to Zion, which I think is a product of his, megalomania, and also his paranoia, and also his increase in devious sexual drives. When he gets his followers to Zion, their hair has to be specific, their clothing has to be specific, which was something that existed before, but it was so severe once they reached Zion. And there really wasn't any male presence there other than him and a few others that, he wanted to keep happy. And I think that, again, is something that the documentary did really well in really encapsulating that unraveling that we can recognize amongst other cult leaders, whether that's Charles Manson or Rock Terrier of the Anthill Kids or Marshall Applewhite with Heaven's Gate, whoever you want to look at. I think you can look at Warren Jeffs and say, wow, he was becoming more reckless, but also committing more abuse, more severe abuse. So it's kind of like, going off the deep end on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, for sure. So for those of you that have not watched a couple of these docs, the Deepen and the Pray and Obey, keep something, pray and obey. Keep sweet, pray and obey. Both very good. The Deepen is a little bit shorter if you don't have as much time.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it. I know you have a ton going on. And what time is it over there? You're like,
it's just gone 8:30.
Okay, we're at 2:30. So I'm gonna go have some drinks after this.
Yeah, absolutely.
A lot.
Yeah, and thank you for letting me have the opportunity to chew your ear off and just kind of ramble on about all of the things that I think. I mean, I know that I've had negative things to say about those documentaries, but overall I think they're both great.
Sorry, I don't no, you did a very good job at kind of just explaining what it is and everything, and the goods and bads, and people are going to take different things away from them. So even though the last one we talked about, I mean, I feel like that's way more to the extreme of what a cult can be. And like I would say what we dealt with in ours within Straightway or Restoration City, I would say it was probably like at a medium. It wasn't real to that extreme, but it wasn't real light. I mean, there definitely was sexual assault going on, and abuse and physical abuse, mental abuse. There was all that stuff going on. So I mean, thank you for what you are doing and just like helping expose some of this stuff. And I know the podcast is kind of doing different forums now and stuff, but you're still helping expose some of these things that are going on, and giving people a place to speak out is great, and it's healing. Like, I know for me, like I'm almost 40. God, I'm almost freaking 40, but I had never, like, it's taken me this long to kind of get to this point where I'm kind of okay. And I left over 15 years ago to where I'm kind of okay with talking about some of this stuff. And even though, I mean, some of it is still hard to talk about, but it just, I feel like there's becoming more of a healing process. And even like me starting this channel and everything, like my mom, my sister, like all of us, like talking more about this stuff when my mom never would have ever.
Wow, that's great. That's great.
So
that's really great. Yeah. I don't think from what I've come to understand that the healing journey or the deconstruction process ever really ends. Yeah. And some people have said that life starts at 40. So I don't think you should be too sad about that. It's an exciting thing. And geez. I mean, it's nice that you get to welcome in the age of 40 as an independent person with critical thinking who can reflect on those things and think, thank goodness I'm not involved in that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm definitely grateful for that, and that I'm still not there at the age of 40. I'd probably, I was about to say something awful. I probably would have ended it if I was still there. But thankfully, yes, out. Yeah, so thank you so much. I would love to have you on again at some point in the future. We can talk docu-series shows. I don't care. Anything to do with
Yeah,
cult.
I mean, there's loads of others we
Yeah.
could talk about.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, I really appreciated the opportunity, Syria. Thank you so much. And if anybody wants to come and share their story with me,
oh
every
yeah, yeah,
single
yeah.
episode
That's
is an education for me, and I welcome any individual that wants to come and share their experiences on the podcast to kind of come and have a chat with me. So people can find me at cultvaultpodcast@gmail.com, or I'm all over social media at Cult Vault Pod. So if anybody wants to come and just get involved in some conversations, or wants to come and have a one-on-one chat with me on the show, on or off the record, actually, I always welcome new conversations with people. Then please reach out and get in touch.
yeah, and you are on Spotify, YouTube, and anything else?
Yeah, Apple Podcasts,
Okay.
Stitcher, all of the usual places people can find
Okay.
podcasts. And occasionally I release video interviews as well, which you can find on my YouTube channel at Cult Vault Pod.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks again. And thank you everyone for listening to this episode. And like I said at the beginning, I will be putting some more episodes out in the next couple months. Hope everyone has a great rest of your day, evening. Have a glass of wine. Cheers.
Cheers, Syria.
See.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.